Oh my goodness, finally, Carlos has made a choice where he's going. He's going to Williams. But don't worry, we're not going to be talking about just that, because this has major ramifications for the F1 driver market. There are going to be two teams who will be sweating buckets as to what they are going to do for the next couple of years. But don't worry, you can have a little bit of Carlos on your lives because he's released his pancake recipe. Naturally, I feel incredibly sorry for Logan right now. After doing the best he could with limited tools and a very obvious favouring of his more experienced teammate, it was clear that the narrative at Williams was going to be headed toward the direction of needing experienced hands on deck. Like with Haas, Williams is not a place for rookies to really flourish, so I really feel bad for Franco Colapinto and Zach O'Sullivan in F2. The Williams Academy is pretty much dead in the water now. However, I'm not too worried about Logan's future. He's probably got a future in IndyCar lined up for him with the new Prema outfit, and right now, I think he's not exactly happy with Marcus Ericsson after the rumours went around about he and James not being on speaking terms with one another. Hey, maybe this is an opportunity if he goes to IndyCar to set up a club with Romain Grosjean. It can be the I Hate Marcus Ericsson Club. So with Carlos being secured by James Vowles and the public infatuation with the former by the latter coming to a close, which has been going on since Spain, although it turns out it's been going on since as early as last year around Abu Dhabi, even though it might have been quite a bleak outlook by going, listen Carlos, I gotta be real, we kinda suck right now. We might suck for a while, but don't worry, we will get better. At that level of honesty, maybe that is something Carlos appreciated, instead of being blown smoke up his bottom by the likes of Audi and Alpine. Even though people are now going online and lambasting the move, think it's going to be the death knell of his career. But I think it could be the best decision out of the three teams that were courting him overtly. Because in my mind, Audi and Alpine were going the wrong way in terms of trying to woo Carlos Sainz toward their direction, extolling the things that they could possibly have, that they will be able to give him loads of money, a long-term future, and things that are hypothetical or they're kind of on the way, but they could happen. For example, Audi were prepared to offer everything under the sun to secure his services once Ferrari signalled their plans for next year, including a huge salary which not even Red Bull would have been prepared to stomach, a team leadership role without question, and being a brand ambassador for the rest of his life, meaning he could explore other ventures within the brand if he wanted. Doesn't that sound like a luscious deal that is absolutely too good to be true, and every single driver up and down the grid would take, as much as a deal to go to Ferrari? Yeah, it does. But maybe that's the problem. It just sounded too good to be true. Did Audi also mention in their discussions that maybe this year and next year might be a little bit tricky, that they're really trying to get their ducks in a row and really put in loads of investment to a team which has really been struggling in recent years and have not really had a good season since, 2013 maybe? Their guy who is in charge of the car concept, James Key, is saying that, oh, we might not be competitive until 2027. Does Carlos really want to wait that long? He's already getting antsy with a 2-year deal, which is why Williams does have a get-out clause by 2027 if they haven't done the deed, which is probably another factor as to why Carlos signed with them. He did have an out. But that kind of long-term thinking is not something that Carlos wants without anything to go by. And now the management's changed. To me, this sounded like a project that was really leaning on the potential perks rather than the product itself. As for Alpine, even though Carlos had been there for a while back in 2017 and 18, and even though the facilities are familiar and they're more grounded, they've produced results as recently as last year with a couple of podiums, I think it's plain to see that not even the might of Flavio Briatore's bragging power could pluck Carlos Sainz away from the Williams deal and get him into their car. Yes, of course, a Mercedes power unit going into the next couple of years is a pretty potent bargaining chip, but it hasn't happened yet. It's still a hypothetical. And Renault are still reeling from their decision in pretty much axing their project in terms of making power units the first time in like 4 decades or something. And not to mention Esteban Ocon's parting gift was to blow apart the entire organisation and make them out to be fools, and the management are the ones that are to blame, not the boots on the ground necessarily. That the entire team is absolutely a mess. We all thought that Ocon was the problem why Alpine weren't able to kick on, that maybe he was the root cause of all of the strife and discord. But it turns out maybe he was just a tiny small little cog in a machine that was just doomed to failure and absolute derision. Because you had problems, for example, of drivers not being heard, they weren't able to get a handle on the ground effect car, so this problem's been going on for years. So, like I said in my previous video, Ocon's time there peaked in 2021 and it's just been downhill from there, and no wonder Alonso was right to leave. There are no clear departments after Safnauer was sacked, and now the Renault overlords are deciding to pull the plug on their engine deal, which supposedly was actually looking likely to exceed expectations on the dyno. And that closure of the project might lead to some serious ramifications to morale when it comes to their staff, or maybe even a strike when no engines will be produced for the team this year, and they're left with warm parts or maybe no engines at all. Does Carlos want to be a part of that? No! Unlike Pierre, who's basically stuck with this deal because he has no other options up and down the grid, he's headed towards 30, and he now has to stick with a team that has a broken promise that was given to him in 2022, Carlos does have a choice. And even though he's been making this ride for months and months and months, aggravating everybody under the sun, he went with the decision that was the most honest and the most understanding of what he needs and what he can expect from the team. Even though it's quite easy to dunk on Williams, especially after their 2024 season has ended up with little to show for it, and even Albon is disappointed with their lack of progress over the season, may I remind you, Alex, that you might be a major part of that problem, because an issue with the current car is that they have little time, attention, and money to be able to upgrade that car because you and Logan keep crashing said car. And Logan isn't the main culprit this time around. If it hadn't been for Checo's spectacular crash at Monaco and his big ding in Hungary, Alex would be topping the F1 Destructors Championship this year. It's a self-destructive loop the Williams drivers find themselves in, but at least their team principal is honest about their plight. And even though I'm disappointed in the way Logan has been handled by that team, especially realising that James had eyes on Carlos before he extended Sargeant's contract for this year, anyway, it is what it is. And here's what VALS had to say about the matter and why Carlos went with them ultimately. The message I gave to him and his family at the time is no different to the message I gave him last weekend in Spa, and I believe that's what won it. From the beginning, I gave him warts and all. Here's what's going to happen. We are going to go backwards. Here's why. Here's what we're investing in. Here's what's coming. Here's where I am excited by this project. And it's your choice, very much, if you want to be a part of it. But I know that we will have success in the future. And I know that it's going to cost us in the short term. And I'm confident that honesty and transparency has paid off. As much as there was more weight on the car, there's a little bit of a joke there because, the Williams car is really heavy. But the actual aerodynamic performance of the car is in a reasonable place. We've just got to shed that weight off so that we can start fighting up the front. There's only one driver I spoke to in Abu Dhabi last year, only one, and it was Carlos. Just to be super clear, I didn't spread bets. I actually think it would have been a more difficult choice for him if Ferrari were more on the rocks, and I didn't know that it would be. My point more was to position myself in the most sensible way possible for that. Again, performance drives everything. If you're in the points, you have a lot more phone calls than if you're not. Now you see, that is an interesting point regarding Ferrari, and that probably saved VALS in the long run, since the Scuderia has relatively floundered since the Monaco Grand Prix, and the team have been lucky to figure in the hunt for scraping into the podium places, let alone consistently winning races. Had the team maintained their form, and Carlos might have been able to get one more win or two under his belt, then maybe the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull might have been a little bit more attentive in securing his services. But regardless of what happened, James was able to look through all of the noise and the lack of results to see what Carlos truly was. A driver who is incredibly smart, not afraid to push back when it comes to strategy because, he's the one in the car. He's just as smart in the car as Fernando Alonso. And maybe Sainz was able to recognise where James VALS is coming from here, because James has been part of two major revolutions when it comes to how well a team does. First, of course, Honda in 2008 when it became Brawn in 2009, and look how that turned out. And then Mercedes in 2013 and into 2014, he was around for that time as well, and look what happened after that. And this decision has saved Carlos from making a really drastic and desperate decision. He might have been forced to take a sabbatical from F1, or maybe retire from F1 entirely, before he's even pushed 30. Alright, Law, that's all very well and good, but what about that fallout you mentioned? Well, I basically laid it out for you already, but I'll elaborate even further. With Williams taking the realistic approach to negotiations instead of extolling the hope and glory awaiting the team very soon, we promised, absolutely, we swear with pinkies, it appealed to the no BS mentality that is Carlos Sainz. No nasty surprises. Everything's been laid out on the table. Potentially, maybe some nice surprises or some very good surprises if Williams do better toward the end of the year, get on top of their weight issue. And going into next year, it could be even better. For Sauber and Alpine, it leaves them in a bit of a quandary, and for the former, Sauber and then Audi, it pretty much leaves them in all right panic, although they won't admit it in public. They're already dealing with a management reshuffle with only 18 months left to go before Audi takes over the whole show from Sauber. And whilst I rate the hiring of Mattia Bonotto as their chief technical officer and operating officer, not as their team principal by the way, and potentially securing the services of Aston Martin's team principal Mike Crack, bringing him back to the Sauber fold where he did cut his teeth in Formula 1 back in the 2000s, and saving him from having to grovel at the feet of Papa Stroll, the change in leadership at this moment, where it was completely unsuspected, is something that Sainz would have taken note of, and considering that they had exclusively dedicated themselves to securing Sainz alongside Hülkenberg, there's seemingly no other candidate from different teams available to select from. And this has played right into the clutches of the team's current lineup. Bottas and Zhou can start again with their negotiations with better terms in mind. And whilst hopes remain thin for Zhou Guanyu to secure a third season in Formula 1, he is a little bit more open to the idea of being their reserve driver for 2025, and Zhou does recognise quite rightly that having some kind of presence in Formula 1 is better than having no presence. It's a valid point and quite a mature one, and one that gave Alex Albon an in for Williams in 2022 when he was the Red Bull reserve driver for 2021. It kept him on the radar, even if he was on the periphery of it. For Bottas, we thought he was going back to Williams, that it was a dead cert that James Vowles would rate his experience when he was working with him at Mercedes. But it turns out that it was mainly just an initial discussion, in case Carlos indeed was swayed by Flavio Briatore and Alpine to go and work for them. So you could boil it down almost to, Valtteri will do. For Bottas though, okay, it's a bit of a loss that he didn't get a chance at Williams again, considering where they might be going. But he has been talking over the last few months that there was still an opportunity, a chance to work with Audi, and now it's more likely in coming true. I completely derided it a couple of months ago, but now with Seidel gone, and clearly he had absolutely no interest in retaining Valtteri or Zhou, this could be the opportunity to remain in position. And he also has a little bit of leverage because right now, Sauber are in panic mode because they have no idea who's going to be partnering Hülkenberg. And they're lucky that Nico has been quite lenient in the news that Andreas Seidel, one of the main factors of him even going to that team in the first place, has gone. He's pretty chill with it. He's like, oh yeah, it's a shame, but oh well. Yes, of course, it might not be Audi's best option, but I think it's the only one that they've got at the moment. Their main star has completely eluded them. And right now, they don't really have much to show for it to try and convince others to come to them. Because sure, they might have got a handle on their pit stops. I think it's Spa. They are actually in the top 10 in terms of fastest pit stops. But they've had a couple of major upgrade packages which have yielded absolutely nothing. Okay, maybe a little bit of qualifying pace that gets them into 12th occasionally, but they had their chance at the beginning of the season. Bottas and Zhou were looking odds-on to score a point or two. They might have had 4 or 5 points by now, had it not been for their pit stops being woefully slow at the beginning and nuking any chance of them getting into the top 10, as said by Bottas and Zhou many times. May I remind you, that first race, the Bahrain Grand Prix this year, Zhou was 11th. And regarding Alpine, this isn't as much of a shock that Carlos rejected this, but it was good enough to spook Williams for a while. Briatore threw everything he could at getting Carlos to come back to Enstone, but it just simply wasn't enough. Of course, there was the talk about getting a Mercedes power unit, and given where they're going, it could be tempting. It was a proactive decision, even though it's going to be costing the Renault brand dear in terms of its integrity, because, look at that. They can't make a good F1 engine. It's meant to be a Halo project, and now they're giving up. They're throwing in the towel. What does it say about the rest of the company? It's not a good look, even though it's a realistic one. Then you just got to consider, yeah, okay, this is a Mercedes deal, but currently, next year maybe, half of the grid will be Mercedes power. And it completely ignores the fact that Williams has an even better relationship with Mercedes, and one that goes through to 2030. And Williams has built their cars around the rear end of the Mercedes ecosystem for several years, a decade now. That synergy is not something that will come immediately to Alpine. Also, I wouldn't be surprised that maybe in private, Carlos had maybe had a chat with Pierre as to what was been going on with Alpine. And that, yeah, Pierre might have admitted that there are some things going on which are a little bit awkward, because Pierre has now come out in public to say that Alpine are simply making too many mistakes, because in the last 3 races, Gasly has had a DNF, and one, he didn't even start the race. But like I touched upon earlier, the proclamations of the other French Alpine driver has certainly turned the team to an absolute pariah for any driver outside of their own academy. I mean, come on. This is just absolutely absurd. I've not seen this kind of chicanery from a team in decades. Just actively checking Ocon's GPS in his company car to then go, "You've been seeing Williams behind our backs, haven't you? Admit it!" That's creepy. That's absolutely creepy as hell. Clearly, Alpine's dealing with some big problems right now, and even though Carlos is somewhat familiar with the factory at Enston, even though the team has now confirmed the likes of Oliver Oakes, the founder of High Tech GP, as their new team principal, that comes with its own ideas and visions for the team that is unfamiliar to Carlos, so therefore, it's not exactly a selling point. The team is currently in a rebuilding phase. But to be fair, I do rate the appointment of Oliver Oakes, because he does know a thing or two when it comes to junior formulae, so I think this is a fairly decent decision. It's a grounded one, it's a realistic one, based around the experience of motorsport. It's not a big headline hiring, which is good. Alpine doesn't need any of that. They already got that with getting Flavio back. Nor do I think Carlos is bothered with the uncertainty and ambiguity of what Audi could offer. Sure, Audi could be absolutely fantastic in 2026. The pains of this and next year for Sauber might be a distant memory, but it's too much to speculate on. And now Audi can't even use the argument that his dad, Carlos Sainz Sr., operates with them in their rally division, because he doesn't anymore. He works for Ford now. He's a Ford guy, which is why many people were speculating that Carlos had done the deed with Red Bull, because, you know, the Red Bull Ford powertrains thing, it looked like a dead cert, but turns out that was a red herring. So yeah, you can understand why Alpine and Sauber are really hurting right now, because I think Esteban completely carpet bombed any chance of a non-Alpine driver going there, and Sauber's inability to score any points this year has done the same thing for them. Which kind of makes Williams an absolute no-brainer to me. Yes, of course, I know that you're going to say that Williams have really been bad in terms of PR, what with the way they've been handling Logan, sacrificing his Grand Prix by giving him inferior parts, and not even giving him a car for Melbourne at the expense of Albon, and that yielded nothing. Yeah, there have been growing pains, there have been reasons to mock Williams, but they knew that this was going to be happening. They decided to deal with it, and in a fairly mature way. And James Vowles has been doing his best to try and explain the situation, that the team is a meritocracy. It has disappointed me, though. It has disappointed me considerably that the dream of Logan Sargeant has completely failed. But yeah, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. He'll be okay. And even though on the surface this might seem like a depressing climb down for Carlos after his 3 wins with Ferrari to go to a team like Williams, Williams should be proud of outsmarting the competition and even denying Audi, a works team, one of their biggest objectives, which they pin a lot of their vision on for their F1 Grandmaster plan. Yes, the jokes will be coming in thick and fast, but Williams has a strong driver lineup again. This has not happened for a very long time. They have had to deal with pay drivers for several years at this point. I think the last time you could say that, yeah, Williams has a strong or solid driver lineup was back with Felipe Massa and Valtteri Bottas in 2016, back to 2014. Or if you want to go back even further, you could say that this is as strong as maybe Mark Webber and Nick Heidfeld back in 2005. Yes, the car wasn't as good. BMW was on the way out to then dedicate themselves to BMW Sauber, but the car did have its moments, and that driver lineup was still a really potent and exciting one. Mark Webber yet to really show his full potential when he was at Red Bull, and Nick Heidfeld really being able to showcase what he could do, and then what he could do at Sauber BMW. He got 3 podiums in 2005, quick Nick. He was a really decent driver. Mark Webber did get a podium himself, so it was a fairly good lineup. I wouldn't say that the Sainz Albon lineup was as good as Montoya and Ralf Schumacher, but hey, at least we can be confident that the drivers that Williams have can produce the goods. And this might actually yield another problem though, but I think it's too early to say. It depends on what the contract said for Carlos. Does he get equal status with Alex Albon? Is Albon still the team leader? I think it is a bone of contention for Carlos whether or not he's the team leader or not, or it's completely equal between them. Otherwise, it's going to get a little bit awkward. And if James was able to convince Carlos after months of deliberations and discussions, surely Williams must be cooking something. At least something more delicious than what Sauber and Alpine can muster. But I think we're all relieved, though, that the saga of Carlos Sainz's decision has come to a close and that we can move on with our lives. And people also pointed out to me that another Spanish driver made a driver move on the first day of the summer break a couple of years ago. Maybe we should have seen this coming. In any case, it allows the F1 driver market to finally crystallize after months of speculation. And even though we've had the occasional driver announcement here, one there, and now there's only like, 3 drives up for grabs right now? I know you're going to be saying about, what about Checo? Well, come on, let's just be real. Red Bull are going to keep him from as long as possible, realistically. I doubt, though, Sauber and Alpine will be happy with this decision. And if it were up to me, and I were in the shoes of both drivers, for Sauber, I'd just keep Bottas. He's a stable pair of hands, he knows what he's doing, and he and Hulkenberg Hulkenberg will be fine, and then they can see what will happen when they become Audi in 2026. And for Alpine, I would put Mick Schumacher in alongside Gasly, since the team need experience and a team player who wants more than ever a proper chance of F1. Yeah, it'll be a bloody nose for Jack Doohan, but it all comes down to what those private test shootout results came up with. We will probably never know what the times really said in fine detail, but if Alpine are really looking to that Mercedes deal, they really want to try and get as good a deal as possible, especially with outside investors. They'll want a good return on what they're bringing in. So maybe Toto might sweeten the deal by going, "Oh yeah, Flavio, if you really want a good deal for our Mercedes engines, maybe you can put Mick in the car and then we can have a look at the numbers and we can give you a little bit of a cheeky deal, what you say?" But then again, with Oliver Oakes now in the chair at Alpine, maybe we could see something different. A pathway into F1 for F2 championship contender Paul Aron, who was a Mercedes junior driver a couple of years ago and is currently driving for High Tech. Or maybe an in for Nikita Mazepin, because he and High Tech, they were like that for a long time. But surely Flavio has enough firepower to stop that from happening. Please, Flavio, please don't make that happen! But regardless, Alpine needs to get itself sorted out first before it goes looking for other drivers. And Esteban Ocon's parting shot really set things off, didn't they? Something I talk more about in this video here that you can go and watch right now. You know what, maybe looking on it, maybe we were a little bit too harsh on Esteban. Just a little bit though.